All right. Hello again, Adventures, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. Today, I'm going to be doing an in-depth review of the G.I. Joe role-playing game Quatermaster's Guide to Gear Sourcebook. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this stuff, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. Now, it's been a while. I'm going through my kind of backlog, and the Quartermaster's Guide to Gear has been out for I think almost a year at this point. So normally, when I do these in-depth reviews, you can normally get if you get the physical book, you can get the PDF for free because Renegade does that when the book first launches. This is long beyond that point, so you actually have to choose between the physical copy or the digital copy. You can't get both for one price. That being said, as a reminder, this is going to be an in-depth review. And when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I am going to talk about the things that I like, talk about the things that I don't like, talk about the things that they did well, talk about the things I think they need to do better. And I am going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. And a lot of people don't want to stick around through an entire video that can be like 2 hours long just to figure out if they want to buy something. So I always have an introductory section called Should You Buy This?, where I divide people into 3 possible buying groups. The first group is a group that I call players. Players are going to be people who are going to be primarily, not exclusively, going to be sitting at the table and playing a single character. They have very specific needs, generally around creating cooler characters. The second group is a group that I call GMs. GMs are going to be primarily, not exclusively, but primarily sitting at a table and running the game. They are going to be writing the stories, running the bad guys, designing combat encounters, things like that. Obviously, they have different needs than players do. The third group is an often overlooked group that I like to call Lorehounds. Lorehounds may never sit down at a TTRPG table, but they're really interested in the lore, in the stories around everything. So, should you buy this? Well, let's find out. The first group. Should players buy this book? So, the Quartermaster's Guide to Gear, compared to literally everything else that I've done for Essence 20, this is probably the most rules-heavy book that I've reviewed. And what I mean by that is not so much that, oh, they're adding all these new rules. There are so many new options in here, and because of how the Essence 20 system works, it just adds so much to the game. There are new weapon upgrades, there's new battle dress upgrades, there's a completely new type of battle dress, there's new rules for kits, there's an alternate way to get requisitions, there is an entire section on vehicles. We'll talk about that in the in-depth review part. But they're really, really cool. And they have new perks and upgrade style things that allow you to do things like turn your characters into part cyborgs or give them nanotech abilities. Like, there is genuinely just a ton of stuff in here. So comparing this to kind of a more traditional tabletop RPG, this is definitely a rules expansion style thing. But because of it, I mean, there's just so many different things in here. The other thing that's kind of unique about this book, specifically as it applies to G.I. Joe, each one of I'm going to try this one more time. Each one of the different Essence 20 games tends to focus on something a little different. The Power Rangers RPG is focused a lot more on kind of really getting into the perk system. And that's where you get a lot of the customizability of that. If you look at the Transformers RPG, it really is about the influences and origins. Like, new influences and new origins for Transformers just really adds so much more creative stuff that you can do because of the transformative options. For G.I. Joe, it really is about equipment. And one of the things that I find really interesting, Transformers, because they can turn into vehicles, vehicular combat and stuff like that is pretty big in that. But G.I. Joe, I mean, if you watch G.I. Joe in the 80s, like, the entire purpose of the TV show was to sell toys. And while, yes, they would sell the action figures, the other thing that they would sell just over and over and over again, a new one like every day, were vehicles. And so, especially in this particular book, it adds so much content specifically around vehicles that you can run entire campaigns exclusively using Joe's piloting vehicles. So for players in particular, yes, there's new influences, there's new origins, there is a new role focus for every single role, I believe. There's a bunch of new perks and the things like that. So yes, that stuff is all in there. And there's new equipment stuff. There's all that. But probably the thing that is going to be the biggest change if you get this as a player is just how much you can do with vehicles, as opposed to before. Like, vehicles were useful for getting from place to place, or you could use them in combat a little bit. But here they have rules for personal vehicles. They have giant battle station style vehicles where you have entire, like, mobile bases that are vehicles and stuff. So there's a lot of vehicle type stuff, and like I said, a bunch of other stuff in here. If you are playing the G.I. Joe RPG, even if you don't want to use any of the new influences, origins, or role focus options, there's so much other stuff in here that's really good. Like the new body armor mechanic is something that literally every single Joe can use. Doesn't matter what and every single Cobra can use it as well. Doesn't matter what your role is, what your focus is, what your influence, what your origin. Body armor is literally a second battle dress that you can put on that just gives you temporary hit points, and you can repair it between battles. It's amazing. So do I think this is a good purchase for players? Yeah, if you're playing the G.I. Joe RPG, this is going to massively expand how you can create your character. The physical right now, I'm looking at the Renegade Game Studio page. It lists it at $45, but it's on sale or something for $40 and 50 cents. I don't know if this is a permanent reduction or they're just doing a sale right now. But I'm going to go with the listed price for my recommendations just in case it goes back up to that. So for the physical book, do I think this is worth $45 for players? Yeah, I do. There's so much here that you can definitely justify spending $45 plus shipping to get this. Now, if you go to your friendly local game store, you can avoid shipping, first of all, and there's a good chance you'll be able to get it lower there if you get it through Amazon or something. Like I said, this book has been out for almost a year now, so paying full price for it is probably not something that you're going to be doing. For the PDF, they list the PDF normally at $30. It's now $27. Again, I don't know if that's a temporary sale, if that's a permanent thing, but yeah, $30, definitely recommend it. Again, there's just so much stuff here. And I didn't even talk about some of the new focus options. Like, one of them is a drone-based drone-based G.I. Joe, which is super cool. And they have specific stuff designed for you to do cool drone stuff. And another one just breaks shit. Which is really cool. So there's lots of good cool stuff in here. Anyway, moving on. The second group. Should GMs buy this book? same disclaimer I make all the time. If your players are going to use these options, as a GM, you're basically required to get it because you have to know the options too. Throwing that out, is there enough stuff here for GMs for it to be worth it? Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff. So, Chapter 1 is mostly player options, and then Chapter 2 is the new equipment and all that other stuff. So 1 and 2 is going to really, really benefit players. It's not that GMs can't use it, but those are the 2 chapters that the players are really going to enjoy. Once you get to Chapter 3, that's the vehicle section. And not only does it list a bunch of new vehicles that you can provide to your players, but it gives you a bunch of new ideas for vehicle-based campaigns, how to integrate vehicles into stuff that you're doing. And they actually introduce some new and alternate vehicle rules, things like rules for chases and stuff like that, so that the vehicular combat doesn't just feel like, oh, the map is bigger. 1 square equals 10 feet instead of 5 feet because you can go a lot faster. So stuff that makes it really interesting. And then when we get to Chapter 4, it basically helps you to the chapter's called Tech Through Time. And it basically gives you ideas for how to set your G.I. Joe adventures in different kind of periods of time. And even kind of alternate dimension style things. Like they have a section called Retro Futurism, which is basically kind of your Fallout style technology where it looks like the 50s, but they have like robots and stuff like that. That's kind of your retro futurism. And then they also have a section called Future Tech. If you wanted to have a more kind of science fiction-y G.I. Joe, kind of similar to the G.I. Joe movies that came out a little while ago that weren't great, but they did definitely have a lot more kind of science fiction built into them than that. They were kind of near future. Let's put it that way. But you can go all the way all the way into the future if you want with the whole future tech thing. And again, this the whole chapter is basically just giving you ideas of, well, this is how you do that, and this is how you visualize these things and describe them and how you figure out how they work, etc. And then Chapter 5 is called The Big Guns. And it's all about what they call battle stations. I'll go into more details when we do the in-depth review. But suffice it to say, they are massive mega vehicles that come with crews and things like that. Like one of them is the USS Flag, which is an aircraft carrier. And it has rules for operating the aircraft carrier. It has plot ideas for adventures you could have while on an aircraft carrier or a battle station or in a stronghold or using a war machine. Like, there's so much stuff here. If your players do want to get more into the kind of vehicle stuff that G.I. Joe was known for a really, really long time, you can definitely do it with this. And there's a bunch of new threats and things like that. There's one in particular, and again, I'll go more specifics when I'm going through it. But there's one in particular that is just a really, really nasty Cobra threat that has the ability to turn any damage that they take is reduced to 1 hit point. So it doesn't matter what they get hit with, they only ever take 1 hit point of damage. And that, with all the other nonsense stuff that they can do, that turns into a pretty freaky, powerful thing to throw at your players. So anyway, so do I recommend this to GMs? Yeah, definitely. Even at the $45 physical version, there's a lot here. And again, if your players are going to want to use any of these options, you're probably going to want to get this anyways. And just the additional stuff that they have in here for GMs, I think justifies the $45 price tag. And then obviously the $30 one is fine as well. So moving on. The third group, should Lorehounds buy this book? If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. Exaggeration is evil. No. I said this over and over and over again. One of the things that the Essence 20 team does better than, I believe, any other tabletop RPG maker on the market right now is they are really fantastic at weaving in lore into their books. There is never anything that happens in any of these books, whether it's a really crunchy source book like this, whether it's more of a campaign setting style book, whatever, they're always putting a ton of lore into it to justify what the new abilities are. And this one does that. But as I said before, this is probably one of the crunchiest books that they've had. If you're not familiar with the term, crunchy just means like very rules, numbers heavy. This is probably one of the crunchiest books that they've put out. And because of that, it's a very dense book, meaning the book itself is not massive. I think it's like 125, 130 pages, somewhere around there. It's not a really, really massive, thick book. But every single page is just loaded with stuff. And because there's all these new rules and new upgrades and new battle dress and all these other things, there's just not a ton of room for lore. There's still a decent amount of lore in here. But compared to a lot of the other books, the lore is going to be a little bit less so. Because again, this is mostly about, hey, let's put a lot of new stuff in here so that players have a lot of stuff to play around with. And so because of that, Lorehounds in particular, if the only thing that you're looking for is new lore and stuff that's interesting to read, you are going to have to stop yourself every paragraph or so, because you'll get a paragraph of lore and then half a page to a page of rules and stuff like that. And then maybe another couple paragraphs of lore and then another half page of crunch. And then, so is there lore in here? Absolutely. But it's not quite as much as a lot of the other books that they've published. And because of that, it's a little bit harder for me to recommend it to a pure Lorehound. I would probably say the physical version, unless you really, really want physical versions, $45 for the amount of lore in here just really isn't worth it. For me, $30 is pushing it a little bit just for the lore. Now, if you don't mind reading all the new features and stuff like that, it's still a really, really good book. But as far as pure lore, you're not going to get as much in here as you have in other books. So it is a hesitant non-recommendation. Let's put it that way. I don't really recommend it unless you're also into looking at all the new vehicles and stuff like that. If you're just here for the lore and you really don't care about stat blocks and stuff like that, probably skip this one. But if you're into more than just lore, it's still a great book. So, yeah, moving on. So, quick recommendation recap. For players, this is a definite recommendation. Even at the $45 physical level, there is just so much stuff packed into this book that you can be creating characters with this book for years and not run out of options. For GMs, it's another strong recommendation. Not only are there new options that you can use not only for players, but also for building threats and things like that to put against the players. But in addition, there are new rules that they give for vehicle combat, so you can run vehicle-based campaigns. There's an entire section about how to kind of shift your G.I. Joe team through different eras. If you wanted to have an old school, like 50s G.I. Joe team, or like a G.I. Joe team set in like 2066 or something like that. And then the final section has an entire or the final chapter has an entire section just about these massive battle stations and the cool adventures that you can set inside them. So very strong recommendation. Then for Lorehounds, it's a hesitant non-recommendation. There's some lore in here. It's not as lore heavy as other Essence 20 books. It still has probably more lore than the new Monster Manual, but that's another conversation. But there's just not quite enough for me able to justify even the $30 unless you're also into the rules of the game. So that's what it is. If the only reason that you're here is to get a recommendation about whether or not you should buy it, thanks for showing up into the comments down below. What is your favorite crazy G.I. Joe style either weapon or vehicle? They had tons of them that you just sit there going, really? Really? You're going to have a little like sled with rocket launchers on it? That's interesting. Okay. Let me know in the comments down below. Now, for those of you still here, it is time for us to get into the in-depth review. As a reminder, this in-depth review is going to be exactly that, in-depth. I am going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they did well, the things I think they need to do better. And because of that, this gets very, very long. The average length of one of these in-depth reviews tends to be about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So, in order to facilitate that, I will always put timestamps in. I know YouTube would prefer me to tell you, watch it all, 7 times in a row, just keep watching, never leave. But that's just not logical for me to recommend that. So look at the timestamps, figure out the parts that you want to hear about, come back later to finish it off. Whatever makes it easiest for you, that is why the timestamps are there. That being said, I think it's time for us to start this in-depth review. The first section. Welcome to the Ultimate Armory. This is just the introduction section. It talks about the stuff that is in here. I will say, compared to some of the other introductions sections, this one is not done in universe. Like a lot of the other ones, you're being addressed by General Duke or Cobra Commander or something like that. This is just explaining literally what's going on here. It lasts for a page, but the real thing that we need to do is Chapter 1. Get in gear. As I mentioned in my recommendations, Get in Gear is your new player options chapter. And I guess the interesting thing about G.I. Joe, the RPG in general, is most tabletop RPGs, you would have player options is going to be, races, classes, backgrounds, stuff like that, stuff that you choose at character creation or at level up. The interesting thing about Essence 20 in general, and definitely G.I. Joe, is the equipment section, which normally would be relegated to like magic items or just something like that, is just as much of an impact on how you play your character as your role or your focus or anything like that. So technically there are 2 player options chapters, but chapter 1 is mostly going to focus on the more traditional ones. Your influences, your origins, and then 8 new foci for the various roles. So the new influences, there is because this is a very kind of equipment and vehicle focused book, most of the new influences are going to be around how you deal with equipment or vehicles. Like the first new influence is called Broadcaster. And it gives you bonuses to making social skill tests using broadcast equipment. So you're really good at using radios and stuff like that. Another one is called Junker, which basically just you are really, really good at making stuff out of anything. So it gives you extra requisitions. This is stuff. So a lot of cool stuff in here, but it is going to be very kind of equipment focused. There's this particular one that's all about driving fast. There's another one where you're a rocket scientist, stuff like that. So if you're not looking to have a very kind of equipment focused or vehicle focused character, these influences may not be as appealing to you. The other thing that's nice about the Essence 20 system is it uses you're kind of expected to use multiple influences. You can have only a single influence. I almost always recommend when people are making Essence 20 characters, bare minimum pick 2 influences. So while yes, these are very, very focused on various either equipment or vehicles, by combining it with another influence from another book, you can basically use the influence to kind of shore up an aspect of your character that maybe you weren't expecting to use as much, so you didn't invest a bunch of essence points into maybe your driving skill. So you can use the influence to kind of shore that up. Or again, you can use the influences here to kind of hyper-focus your character into like the ultimate vehicle-based G.I. Joe character. The choices really are yours. The new origins are kind of interesting as well. There's 3 of them. It's Futurist, Militia Member, and Racer. Racer, obviously, you are focused on racing. But Futurist is a very kind of hyper equipment-focused origin where it's easier for you to upgrade your equipment. Your allies get extra stuff. It's a cool thing. Militia, on the other hand, is really actually focused on you not upgrading your weapons. You actually get bonuses for using standard equipment and standard upgrades. So I find it really, really interesting that they were able to create 2 different origins that, again, are going to change how you play your character, how you plan your character, that are kind of polar opposites. One where upgrade everything, upgrades are the coolest things ever, and then another one goes, no, I just want something, I point, I pull the trigger, and then the thing on the other end stops moving. And I'm very good at that. And I just find that really interesting. And then the Racer one is the Racer one. So, yeah, so those are the origins. It blows my mind every single time that I do one of these in-depth reviews for the Essence 20 system, just how much more useful origins are than species or races or lineages or whatever you want to call it in whatever system. Origins in the Essence 20 system are always interesting and exciting. Like when Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft came out, I really loved the lineages in there, but they didn't, like, it wasn't one of those things like, oh, I can think of an entire character I can build around this lineage. It was one of those, oh, you know, this character I already have, they might have fun with that lineage. But it's never been something that I want to build an entire character around a race or a species or a lineage, whatever it is. But with Essence 20, 100%, you can do that. And from level 1 up to level 20, your origin is going to matter. And it's going to come up in almost every session, if not every session. And I find it fascinating that that's still something, even years and years later, as we started to figure out, quote unquote, the meta, and figuring out, you know, you have people that are now learning how to min-max their characters and stuff because the system's been around long enough. Origins have not been relegated to, oh, cool, I get some, you know, stat bonuses, which is all really what lineages and races and species and whatever you're going to call them are in most other tabletop RPGs. So, yeah. Anyway, the new role focus options, there's a lot of cool stuff. The new commando is called Chameleonite. It's exactly what it sounds like. If you want to be Zartan, specifically from the G.I. Joe movie where he just, like, he has the face that automatically change, like, that's what the Chameleonite is, and it's really cool. And there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. The infantry focus option is the drone pilot that I mentioned earlier, where you are your subclass is designed to be able to give you really cool things that you can do with a drone. It's a pet class, effectively. Now, the one thing that I'm not 100% certain on, and it's just because I'm not as familiar with how drones and pets work in Essence 20, because I haven't used any of them yet, is the base rules for using a pet of any caliber is the pet only acts when it's given a command. So if you want your drone to attack the enemy or do something useful, you have to give it a command, which is a standard action. Now, they do mention that the effective way that it works is you tell it to use a skill on a target, and it will continue using that skill on that target until it has completed that command. So there could be an argument that you only need to give it an order once. Like if there's a big thing, a big enemy there, you can just go drone, attack that target using your targeting skill, and it will continue to attack every one of its turns. I'm not sure if it's been ruled or not in that direction, and I don't know if there's other things built into like the drone upgrade system that I didn't go super in depth in, that allows you to start controlling your drone with free actions or just something like that, so you don't have to give up all of your actions to do something with a drone. Because for the infantry in particular, the infantry is an attack-based class. They get up to 4 attacks for a single standard action. So throwing away a single attack so that your drone can make an attack, depending on how you build your drone, there's a lot of things you could do with that. But once you're getting 2 or 3 attacks, trading them for a single drone attack is not that great. So I would assume there's more to this than I understand, but that's the only thing that made me a little hesitant on the infantry. But if it is basically a pet-based class, that they do figure out how to work in it, because there's nothing in the drone pilot perks that lets you command your drone with anything other than your standard action. So yeah. Anyway, the new officer is a tech officer. I don't think I'm going to go through every one of these. But there's a couple that are really cool. The tech officer is really cool because it's the officer in general is kind of a battlefield commander, and the tech officer just gets all this cool tech stuff that it gets to use. It made me giggle a little bit. The new Ranger focus option is called Disruptor, and it's literally, I use melee weapons to break shit, and they're really good at it. And so, again, in a vehicle-based campaign, a Disruptor is going to be immensely good because it can go up and destroy enemy vehicles, and then when your side is the only side with vehicles, you're in a big advantage. Or if they're using machines or anything like that, like the Disruptor is going to be really, really useful. In a campaign set in the wilderness where there's really nothing to break, Disruptor's not going to be quite as nice. You're going to have to rely on your base Ranger options to feel important. Other than that, yeah, the new focus options are interesting. For lack of a better term, there's none of them that I really have any issue with, where I'm like, oh, this isn't going to be very fun. The new Vanguard focus option is called Strafer, and it's literally someone that flies a plane or something, and so it is entirely a vehicle-based option. So again, a lot of these are going to be very, very useful in a vehicle-based campaign, and if for whatever reason you don't have access to vehicles, your focus is going to feel wasted. Like the Strafer without an air vehicle really can't do almost anything from their focus, because all of their focus stuff is about using that. So yeah, I guess the one quote unquote downside of the new focus options is they are designed around vehicles and the new equipment and stuff in the book. And if for whatever reason you're not doing that, or you're just not using it in this part of your campaign, they're going to feel a bit of a waste, because they are hyper focused on that, as opposed to, well, we're going to give you some benefits to this and then some stuff that you can use everywhere else as well. So yeah, after the new focus options, they have a bunch of new general perks, which again, they have things like anti-air combat training, which is basically if you're on the ground and they have air support, you get benefits to taking it out, which again, in a vehicle-based campaign is really, really useful. And if they're never using choppers or planes or anything against you, it's completely worthless. So it's another thing that, again, this is designed around gear. It's the Quatermaster Guides to Gear. But you're really only going to want, especially with decisions like general perks that are kind of permanent, where once you make this decision, you don't get to go back and change it later. You really have to understand, your GM has to understand as well, what kind of campaign that you're running. Because if someone takes anti-air combat training and then eventually takes advanced anti-air combat training, and then they never get a chance to use it, they're going to feel like they just wasted 2 perks. At the same time, they have stuff like Basal Nano Infusion. And what that is it allows you to take a nanomite power. Basically, you get nanomachines in there, and there's a whole list of the different abilities that you get that are nanomachine based. And I've got to say, it's really freaking cool. The nano powers are really cool. They're kind of an offshoot of the augmentation, I think is what it was called, in the Cobra. What was it called again? Cobra something. Cobra Codex, there we go. In the Cobra Codex, they basically introduced how to like augment and put like make cyborgs and stuff like that, because that is a very Cobra thing, where we'll chop up our troops and put robots in them. So the nano infusion uses a similar system, or I think it technically uses the same quote unquote system. It's just nano powers instead of tech upgrades. So, and it does feel slightly more humane, to be blunt. Like the idea of using a prosthetic if you lost a limb or something like that, completely ethical, completely humane. But the idea of removing a part of your body to replace it with a prosthetic does feel a little bit weird, like you're sacrificing part of your humanity, which feels right at home in a Cobra campaign. It doesn't feel quite as home in a G.I. Joe campaign. And so the nano stuff, since it's not really removing a part of yourself, you're just kind of augmenting what you already have, it just feels better in my book. So yeah, the rest of the perks in here are cool. They're interesting. They have a lot again, some of them are very, very hyper focused, but some of them aren't, and they're just useful stuff. Like a good example, Box Shot is one of the new perks, and it's basically you have a limited number of times that you can do this, but you can attack 2 targets within a certain distance with 1 attack action. So you basically learn how to kind of line up targets and shoot the same target, 2 different targets with the same shot. Stuff like that is just interesting and useful. So, yeah. Anyway, that's chapter 1. Moving on. Chapter 2. Into the Armory. This is your equipment chapter. And the first thing that they introduce you to is new weapon effects and traits. I don't believe all of these are technically quote-unquote new, but it's possible that because it's taken me so long to do this in-depth review, I've just seen them in future books. But they have stuff like, and it's possible that some of these are, this is the first time they were introduced in G.I. Joe, but they've shown up in either Power Rangers or Transformers. Like the grapple weapon effect, I believe that has existed somewhere else. It might have been a Transformers thing, or the marked weapon effect. Useful, interesting the things, and it's one of the things that I really like about the Essence 20 system in general is just the massive number of quote-unquote traits that you can have that actually do something. I gave a good example years ago. We were talking about how Pathfinder since the second edition is overly designed. There's just so much complexity in there just so that it can be complex. And one of my favorite examples is the idea of weapon traits. There are weapon traits that have no mechanical benefit, nothing. It doesn't change anything except to define the weapon as an elven weapon versus like an elven dagger does the exact same thing as a regular dagger. Doesn't cost anything different. It's an elven dagger or a dwarven dagger. And the only thing that does is, well, no, because then you can have proficiency in elven weapons, and so that means that you can use this. Yeah, but you could also just have proficiency in daggers, or just use a regular dagger, and it doesn't change anything. That is complexity for complexity's sake. So I'm not a fan of just, hey, let's put a bunch of different traits in here. But every single trait that they have not only is different enough, but also actually has a mechanical benefit that changes how the weapon works or the armor works. And that I really, really love because it allows for a lot of customizability and a lot of interesting combinations when you start putting together traits that may not, that don't naturally happen together, but in your particular build they work. So yeah, a bunch of new traits, a bunch of new weapons, or upgrades, which the weapons themselves, well, do they have it here? No, they don't have it here. No, it's in a different chapter. The new weapons are not, incredible. Like, one of the new weapons, it's a harpoon gun. And it has the amphibious, grapple, and reload traits. Amphibious is not a new trait in this. It just means that it works underwater. But the grapple trait is new in this particular book. And it's literally, if you shoot them with the harpoon, the whole point of a harpoon gun is you have a rope on the harpoon. And so now you've got a rope on them. So stuff like that is interesting. And then, again, just a bunch of new upgrades. And it's one of my favorite things about the Essence 20 system. Upgrades are just so much fun. Because, again, your equipment that you bring into combat is going to have as big an effect on how you play your character as your focus choice, as your role choice, as your origin. All those things, they all work together. And every single upgrade is a new way to change how your character plays. And they're just super, super fun. And then they get into the section called Classic Weapons, which will have things like the Combat Nunchaku or Excalibur. Yes, they have Excalibur in the game. However, my personal favorite is the Laser Lash. It's a whip! If anyone is unaware, I am a huge fan of whips. Whips and chains excite me. Na, come on, do. Not because of that. I am a huge Castlevania fan. I have been since I was very, very young. I remember some of my earliest memories as a child. We had Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest on the NES. I still have most of the password for every upgrade in the game and being ready to face Dracula memorized. Um, I love Castlevania, and I love whips as weapons in RPGs in general. I built a dual whip wielding ranger for the Curse of Strahd season of the Adventures League, and it was an awesome character to play. I had a blast playing him. So Laser Lash is a laser whip, and it's super super cool. I love it so much because it can grapple. It can maneuver. It can bypass. It's the coolest thing ever. If I make a GI Joe, they're using a laser lash, even though it's a Cobra weapon. They're using a laser lash. I don't care what I have to do. I am making my whip wielding GI Joe. It's how it goes. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. The molecular reducer enlarger. It's a shrink ray. Other stuff. And then we get into body armor. So, again, I've mentioned before, each of the 3 core Essence 20 books focus on different things. The Power Rangers is really, really focused because there are no focuses. Power Rangers is really, really focused on your role, really defines you, and your perks. Perks are a really, really big deal in Power Rangers because you get tons of them. There are Zord perks, there are General perks, there are Power perks. There's this perky. It's the perkiest game ever. And so that's what that game does really, really well. Transformers is all about the vehicles, the origins, all the cool stuff that you can do with that. G.I. Joe is about the equipment. And one of the things that G.I. Joe does that the other two just really don't is battle dress, your armor effectively. Power Rangers, your armor is basically chosen by your role. Whatever your highest upgrade class is, that's what kind of armor you're going to be wearing. For Transformers, they're a little bit different where they still have armor, but there's upgrades that they can apply to their chassis to give them higher armor. However, G.I. Joe, your battle dress is an entirely separate aspect of your character that you can upgrade and do all these really cool things with. And body armor is another layer on top of that. And what the body armor is, at its most basic, body armor is temporary hit points. It acts as additional hit points that when you get hit by specific types of damage, it will absorb the damage before you do. And then in between combat, you can use kits to repair it. So that in and of itself is interesting. It makes G.I. Joes in general hardier, but body armor, not only is there a lot of different body armors that have a bunch of different traits or things like that, but there are body armor upgrades so that you can kind of customize your body armor so that it does the exact thing that you want it to do. And you don't have to choose between your regular battle dress and having body armor. Body armor can be worn in addition to your regular battle dress. So it's a really interesting, unique system that not only gives your Joes some extra hit points so that they're tougher to kill, but it rewards the players for being prepared. Again, in order to repair your armor, you need to have a kit specifically for repairing it. And you have to make specific skill tests in order to be able to do that. So if you're going to be relying on your body armor for things, well, then you need to make sure that you're bringing the correct kit with you in order to do that. And kits in general are basically going to be named after either a a specialization or a skill. So you might have like a technology kit or something like that, or a field repair kit. You could call that. But yeah, anyway, I really love the new body armor. I think it's really cool and amazing. After the body armor, they talk about new kits and kit rules. Basically, kits are tools that you can use either to make checks that you normally couldn't make for whatever reason. Like if you have no training in technology, let's say, you're probably not going to be able to hack something. Like if you have no training in whatsoever, you're not even going to be given the chance to roll. They're just going to say, no, you can't do that. However, with a kit, it can allow you to make checks you normally wouldn't, or it can augment checks that you could make, but this makes them easier. So things like a thieves' tools would effectively be maybe like a stealth infiltration kit is what you might call it, or something like that. So again, they're useful things, and again, the idea behind kits is G.I. Joe is really about rewarding preparation more so than any of the other Essence 20 systems. G.I. Joe rewards preparation, and you are expected when you are given your mission to think, okay, what are the things that I'm going to need to do on this mission, and get maybe different weapons than you normally use, and any kits that you think, well, if this is going to be an infiltration mission, I'm going to get a stealth kit that makes it easier for me to be sneaky. Or, if this is going to be a demolition thing, I'm going to get an explosives kit or something like that. So, yeah. After that, they talk about alternate requisition rules where you can do requisition points, where instead of, I believe, you basically spend points instead of making various checks and stuff like that. The other one that I actually really think is interesting, just because this is kind of how I have been treating most Essence 20 games, is they have an alternate rule where it's one requisition per character level. So when you level up, you can requisition new equipment, which could include upgrading your old equipment or whatever it is. And to me, that just feels a little bit closer to how I like to run games, where, you get your gear, and as you grow, your gear grows with you. So I kind of like that. And then they also have equipment assignment by division, which they've tried in other books, and I'm just never a huge fan of it. But things like, if you are, they have equipment packages. So if you're in Arctic operations, you just automatically get tactical armor with weather gear, Arctic upgrade. You automatically get a close combat blade with the blazing upgrade and elemental grenades of fire, and then you get a limited survival Arctic kit. It can be useful in situations where, like, let's say your GI Joes are going, hey, we've been contacted by the U.S. Marines, and they need us. We're helping out with this particular branch. I don't know any of the kind of organ or the I can't remember what they're called. The subdivisions in the military, like different air wings, have very particular things that they do in the Air Force, and that's all that they do. So you can tell a lot about a person by finding out what company or wing or whatever they're assigned to, because that particular wing does just one thing. That's the only thing that they do. And so perhaps, hey, we got a request to help out, a Marine unit. So we're going to give you the aquatic operations kit. So there's no requisitions that you do. You just get these the things. So, yeah. Overall, I've never been, like, even when it was first introduced, to me it felt like overcomplicating things. Because all they do is they list the stuff here. It still requires you to flip back between, in this particular book, between multiple books, because some of the stuff that you get with these kits doesn't show up in this book, and it's all marked with an asterisk if it's not in this book. So I just think I think it's extra steps that you don't really need to take, but it can be useful in certain situations. So yeah. Moving on. Chapter 3. Hangars, harbors, and motor pools. It's the vehicle chapter. And this was the chapter where I was not a huge G.I. Joe fan when I was a kid. I was massively into Power Rangers. I was kind of into Transformers. I was a lot more into Beast Wars than I was to G1 Transformers, because G1 Transformers was before my time. But I was I was in the perfect age range to just get enraptured with Beast Wars. And I remember when Beast Machines came out and everybody hated it. Because the art style changed and everything was just so different and it wasn't fun anymore. And coming back to it years and years later, it's actually an interesting series. It's nowhere near as good as Beast Wars. Anyway, so it took me a while to kind of remember what G.I. Joe was. And G.I. Joe, like, the thing that reminds me the most of G.I. Joe, is, as dumb as this sounds, is Cheat Commandos! Rock on! If you have no idea what Cheat Commandos is, just type in Cheat Commandos to Google and then enjoy. It is wonderful. It's a parody of G.I. Joe. But the tagline for the company that makes the Cheat Commandos is, they're called Cheap as Free Toys, and their tagline is, buy all our playsets and toys, boom. And that literally was G.I. Joe. Like, they were constantly, no, the Joes, oh no, it's Cobra Commando, what should we do? Well, you can bring out the new air-to-surface G.I. Joe Supercopter Zor, and it fires these missiles, pew, 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 pew. Like, they were always introducing these new vehicles, and they all looked nonsense crazy, and it was what they did. I had forgotten how much vehicles were a part of G.I. Joe. Like, they sold significantly more vehicles than they did action figures, I believe. I have no idea if that's true, but it felt like every commercial that I saw, there was either a vehicle or some kind of new body armor thing that was mostly a vehicle, but attached to your face or something. And reading through this chapter in chapter 5, I just kept laughing because it's so G.I. Joe. Like, it screams G.I. Joe, and it was almost as if I'd repressed the memory of just how monetized the G.I. Joe brand was. Like, for Transformers, they just sold new Transformers. Like, that's what they did. I have, when I was a kid, I had the Transmetal Cheetor, and I had the Transmetal 2 Cheetor. I have no idea what happened to my Transmetal Cheetor. It really upsets me because I like that one better than Transmetal 2. My Transmetal 2 Cheetor is behind me. It is on the shelves behind me. It's not set up or anything because I'm missing like 90% of it. It's just the robot. But that's how Transformers made their money, is they just create new characters and sell them. It was the reason why the Transformers movies scarred a generation for life, because they went and they just murdered half the Autobots, including Optimus Prime, so that they could sell you his replacement. Like, that's how they did it. But G.I. Joes, they didn't have to kill anybody. They just introduced a new nonsense-named vehicle. And so this chapter is all about integrating vehicles into your Kika campaign. And again, the thing that it's effectively referencing was the hyper monetization of G.I. Joe, which is slightly sad. But the actual stuff that they have in here is really cool. Like, there's so much interesting stuff, and I am a huge fan. Like, they have a section talking about how to do chases and races. I would actually prefer, and I guess the Field Guide to Action Adventure has stuff on it as well, and they reference in here there's more robust rules for chases and races. I would have liked to see them either reprinted here or come up with some new tables and stuff that you can roll on for chases, because the Dungeon Master's Guide has both the 2014 and the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide has rules for chases. Anytime I'm looking through a DMG style book or a section in a book that's DMG style, if they have a section on how to do chases, I am happy, because that's one of the more enjoyable things that I've run in tabletop RPGs, is just going, hey, you guys are on a chase. Let's go ahead and do this, because it feels exciting. And you can get the players really invested in if you describe things correctly. So, and it gives the players, basically permission to use abilities in ways that they're not designed to. Because the chase should feel like high stakes. Even if it's like you're just playing a game of tag, it should feel like high stakes, because every single time a new round happens, you might lose track of your quarry for whatever reason. And so using your limited spells and stuff like that to give you an advantage in the chase feels right. So yeah, anytime they put in rules for chases and stuff like that, I'm always a fan. And then they talk about group vehicle specialization, whatever. Personal vehicles is another thing that I really enjoy as well, because again, especially if you have like that strafer focus, you need to be in a flying vehicle in order to make use of your focus. So giving someone with the strafer focus a personal vehicle makes sense. And they have a table that you can use to kind of have your vehicle level up with you, and they have a section on how to balance things when players have a personal vehicle and stuff like that. But I really think that's cool. And again, I'm a big fan of the idea that you should become connected to your equipment in general. So having a personal vehicle as opposed to, I'm just going to get into this plane that was sitting here. It just, your character is going to feel more connected to it. And if something happens to it for whatever reason, they're going to be more attached to it. So I like stuff like that. I think it's cool. Then they have a bunch of things for vehicle upgrades, because again, if you're going to have a personal vehicle, you better be able to upgrade it. And there's tons and tons of vehicle upgrades. So, yep, because that's what you need. So you can make them super cool and interesting. And then they introduce some new vehicles, like the Armadillo. It's a mini tank. Or the Defense Mech. If you want an Iron Man armor, I mean, that's effectively what the Defense Mech is. It's bulkier than the Iron Man armor. But I'll read you the description. Taking advantage of exoskeleton frames used for construction work, Joe combat engineers converted them into mechanized battle suits capable of defending critical assets at a moment's notice. So yeah, if your personal vehicle is your own Defense Mech, there you go. It's threat level 4. So generally you shouldn't be getting it, according to this, shouldn't be getting it until like level 8 or 9. But still. There's the Eagle Hawk, which is their kind of hybrid jet plane or jet chopper things. And here's another. Havoc. Heavy Articulate Vehicle Ordnance Carrier. And that's such a G.I. Joe name. Like, I can see the commercial in my head right now of Joe's. There's a kid, and he's in a place with a lot of dirt, because they always did this in like these big dirt pits. And they'd have his little Duke guy, and he'd be like, oh no, Cobra Commando is here. And you'd have, they cut over and it's like, I'm here, and go Cobra. And he'd go, oh no, what are we going to do? Don't worry, Duke. Just check out the Heavy Articulate Vehicle Ordnance Carrier. what? Yeah, and then a dirt wall just falls down. You see this big thing driving through it. Yes, the Havoc. It comes with computerized synchronized machine guns. Totally cool. Pew, 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 pew. A 9mm repeater machine gun. Take that, Cobra. The Lancer bipulse guided missiles. Firing missiles. Like that. Those were the commercials. And that just... It's just like blatantly, that is 100% what you could have had in there. And it makes sense in the game as well. This isn't like a parody book like Acquisitions Incorporated. No, this thing actually works. But it's just, I love everything about it. I think it's just lovely. It's just nonsense. So anyway, bunch of things there. Sky Sweeper Jet, the Steel Marauder. Again, I can already see the commercial for the Steel Marauder. And then they have a bunch of Cobra vehicles, because of course they do, including the Buzzbore, which is a giant bladed wheel with with cannons and missiles on it. Because of course. Why not? The Hiss 4 High-Speed Sentry Mark IV. The Mamba, which is their chopper. It's nonsense. Like, I'm not saying that it's silly or stupid or anything like that. This is so blatantly G.I. Joe. And I had forgotten that this is what G.I. Joe was. And when you look at the pictures, like, they look like freaking... I remember seeing some of these as toys. I remember seeing them in toy stores. And now I can play them in my TTRPG and have to pretend that they're real things. Like, it's... Again, I am not mad at this at all. I think this is the greatest thing ever. But this was me, like, remembering a core memory. Like, it's so weird. I hadn't thought about this, and then when I was doing the research for this and the other G.I. Joe book that I need to do my in-depth review on, it unlocked a core memory from this. I'm like, oh my god, I remember. He's beginning to believe. Yeah, that's what it was. So anyway, that's the end of that chapter. Moving on. Chapter 4. Tech through time. As I mentioned before, equipment is really, really important to the G.I. Joe RPG. The G.I. Joe RPG does equipment better than any other Essence 20 RPG. But if you want to set your G.I. Joe campaigns in different time periods and stuff like that, you can't just go, well, we're not going to use all the cool equipment just because it wouldn't make sense for it to be in the 1960s. So this entire chapter is basically talking about how you can flavor different things depending on what time period you want your stuff to be in. And like I said, the one that I really, really enjoyed, the retrofuturism, I'm just going to read the first paragraph because it describes it perfectly. Retrofuturism is the anticipation of what the future might be like from the point of view of a particular era. Numerous examples of retrofuturism. Let's try this again. Numerous examples of retrofuturism may be found in popular science fiction films where their depictions of, say, 2001 or 2019 is nothing like how the world was during what is now our past. So they talk about the idea of using stuff that seemed like what we thought the future was going to look like and what it actually turned into. And they just kind of show you different styles of campaigns. Like you could have cutting edge, which is basically, just barely near future type stuff, or super science. In a super science campaign, your PCs have access to technology that is dreamt of but won't be feasibly possible for at least a half century or longer. Or the future. or science fiction. So yeah, basically just talking about ways for you to have your G.I. Joe campaign set in different kind of time periods and the flavor that you want to add to it. Like, it's the entire chapter is about that until we get to cybernetic enhancements. As I mentioned before, in the Cobra Codex, they introduced cybernetic enhancement, basically replacing limbs with robot parts. They have some new alterations that you can use for cybernetic enhancements. There's not many. I think there's 1, 2, 3. There's 4 new ones. So if you want to have a cyborg Joe, you're probably going to want to look into the Cobra Codex to look at all the enhancements that they have there as well. Because with only having 4 here, they're useful stuff, but maybe not enough if you really wanted to lean into that. I'm a cyborg. I'm RoboCop. Nanomites, on the other hand, are their new thing that they're introducing in this book. And the nanomites, they're basically programmable nanomachines. And the first thing they talk about are nanomite missiles, which are basically missiles that are designed to basically eat up stuff. If you watched, again, the original G.I. Joe movie that came out in like 2017 or whatever it was, with Channing Tatum and one of the Wayans, nanomite missiles was a huge plot point in that. And they kind of described in the same way. However, then you get to the nanomite powers section. And this is where those new nano perks come from. And there are kind of basics stuff. Like, one of the nanomite powers is called all-around vision. It's a standard availability thing. And it's basically, you can see in a 360-degree arc around your body, and it gives you benefits to alert tests. And you have a limited number of uses of nanomite powers. And unless otherwise noted, nanomite powers within a character may be used twice a day. Man, I cannot talk today. You have limitations to how many times you can use this. But you start getting more interesting things, like electric discharge is a limited availability one. Basically, you can give an electric discharge from your hand, and it does electric damage. As far as it being a weapon that you're going to be using in combat, it seems like something you can only use twice a day. It only does a single point of electric damage. It just doesn't seem like that's very useful from a purely combat perspective. And you're right in that. But the idea that you can just discharge electricity from your hand, there's a bunch of different places where that would just be an extremely useful ability, and especially in a technologically advanced society, the ability to just fry something by touching it, you really can't undervalue that from a role-playing perspective. Other things are like you can get poison immunity. One of them's called Dominate. You have mind control nanites. Remote control is another one that I thought was really interesting. You can use your nanomites to infect a machine so that you can use it as if you were piloting it. And they have specific rules in there that, well, what happens if you do that to something that's already being piloted? Like, maybe during these vehicle combats, you're like, okay, that particular vehicle, I want it to join us, but it has a pilot already. So you do that, and then you make some skill tests against the pilot to basically take control of it. And that's a really, really cool thing. So, yeah, I love the new nano powers. Like I said, from a purely like lore ethics standpoint, nano powers feel more ethical than intentionally removing pieces of your body to replace them with robot parts, which is kind of what's implied in the Cobra Codex. So I kind of like nanomite powers better than cybernetics, unless again you're playing a character that has a missing limb or something like that, and then you replace your normal prosthetic with like a super cool prosthetic. Then that's totally cool. But anyway, and the final part of this is they have a couple new threats. And again, I mentioned in the I think in the GM section about a new threat. The threat itself is called a Nano Viper. And I mentioned this when I was talking about the combat encounter that I ran a couple days ago. But 5th edition monsters, probably half of them are just, they can move, they do damage, and they take a lot of time to kill. Like, that's as complex as a lot of the stat blocks get. Essence 20 never does that. Essence 20 threats always have a bunch of different things that they can do, and a lot of different things that you can use to create interesting, unique encounters. And the Nano Viper is just nonsense. One of the powers that they have is called Nanomite Healing. Whenever a Nano Viper suffers damage, it reduces the amount to 1. I mentioned that before. That is such a major deal, because as you get to higher levels, you will get weapons and powers and abilities that allow you to do more than 1 point of damage. And there are certain roles that can do 4, 5, 6 points of damage in a single attack, and none of that matters to a Nano Viper. And I just find that fascinating. There's a bunch of other things that they can do as well. Like, they have a disintegrate ability. they can do just so many different things. It's a really complex, interesting stat block. And they're only threat level 6, so they're not like super high end, threat level 18 creatures. Everything about this it's a cool thing to deal with. So, yeah, anyway, moving on. Chapter 5. The Big Guns. This is all about mega vehicles and, like, fortresses. The first thing you talk about are battle stations. I'm just going to read the first paragraph because it describes it well. Battle stations. Small fortifications with a single purpose and minimal crew are peppered across battlefields during extended combat campaigns. Known as battle stations, these installations help the defenders establish hold in an area, while also allowing them to put portable generators, comm units, and more esoteric units into the field quickly and effectively. So they are kind of mobile forward operating bases, kind of the thing. And they have a bunch of different ones. They have an air defense station. They have checkpoints, outpost defender kits, things like that. And then they have Cobra battle stations as well. And then we get to strongholds. Permanent structures are required for both Joe and Cobras to establish footholds. These structures, known as strongholds, are built to last longer than a few days, and in some cases even become permanent fixtures. Blah, 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 blah. They're big things, like a G.I. Joe command center has all these different things. Transportable tactical battle platform. 100% transportable tactical battle platform has got to be the name of a toy. Like, I guarantee it was a toy at one point. It just sounds... I remember that. And the interesting thing about the strongholds is, after they kind of describe exactly how they work, they'll have plot seeds. Like, for the transportable tactical battle platform, they have these plot seeds. A battle platform has become stuck in a seabed, and a local government is insisting it be removed or it will be seized. Can the Joes navigate international politics to free the stuck fortification? And that's the thing that I think is most useful about this section. It's not just the fact that they're giving you stat blocks for these giant machines, but they're giving you plot seeds on how am I going to introduce this to my campaign. Maybe this becomes like your mobile base for this particular team of Joes. Like you guys get assigned to one of these transportable tactical battle platforms. Or maybe it's just something that you spend a few levels doing stuff around. But having those plot seeds are just really, really useful. And then they go Cobra Strong holds. They always go G.I. Joe's stuff, then Cobra stuff. And then after that, you get war machines. Things like the Mobile Command Center or Rolling Thunder. Again, just nonsense. And the Cobra war machines. Again, this 100%, this genuinely had to be a real toy. The Bug, Ballistic Underwater Global Guard. Again, it looks like I'm making fun of them. I'm not. This is so accurate that it hurts. These were real things. And I just love that they're showing up in the TTRPG as serious things. Like it's amazing. I can't get over this. Anyway, moving on to final thoughts. Overall, I have been absolutely tickled pink with this book. It has just been so. There's been so many things in there that as I've looked into them, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, that's really cool. Oh, that's really cool. And then once I got to chapter 3 and started looking at the vehicles, again, it just unlocked that core memory of, oh my God, this is G.I. Joe. Like, yeah, you'd have these cool action figures, of Lady J and the Duke and all that stuff, and they'd all come with like their own personal weapon, but then you would get all of these and you would put them in a vehicle. And that was the thing about the vehicles, was they were all designed for you to be able to take your G.I. Joe action figures and put them in the vehicles. That's how they were all designed. And it blew my mind how much that I now remember that. I didn't before, and now I did. And it's so blatantly G.I. Joe. And I love everything about it. The actual mechanics and everything in here are great. Again, a lot of it is just kind of building on systems that already exist, which is another thing that I liked about the book. They really didn't introduce too many kind of brand new systems. They just augmented systems that already were there. And that was one of the problems I was starting to have with G.I. Joe in general, was just how many new systems they kept putting on. Like the just ungodly high number of factions that exist in G.I. Joe, and how many different factions, and the fact that you can change factions randomly and stuff like that. Like, G.I. Joe is the most complex of the Essence to 20 games, and it's borderline getting close to that complexity for complexity's sake. I don't think it's crossed that line yet, but it's getting real close. And so I like the fact that anything that they introduce in here, for the most part, is a modification on an existing system. I don't think there's any completely brand new systems that they introduce here. And with that, you're still getting a lot of complexity in there, but it's not like needlessly complex. So yeah, overall, I really like this book. It upsets me that it took me this long to be able to do the review on it, because it's a cool, interesting book. My only problem with the book was I was expecting this to basically be like Finster's Monstermatic Guide to Monsters. As much as, yes, it's a Power Rangers book, anyone that plays Essence 20 needs to get that book, because it explains in great detail how to create your own threats. And to my knowledge, it is the only place in the entirety of Essence 20 that has that explanation. And so it's an absolutely essential book for game masters. I was expecting the Quartermaster's Guide to Gear to be the same thing as Monstermatic, except for gear. And they don't do that. There's nothing in here. By the way, this is what we use to design new gear and new traits and stuff like that. They give you a bunch of new traits to work with, and there's so many different upgrades in here and in the other books that as a GM, creating your own custom equipment is literally just applying the various upgrades to the standard gear that exists. And there's so much of it that already exists that it's not difficult to create your own stuff. But I was hoping for a little bit more of a breakdown of, hey, this is the code behind it. Does that mean you can't create your own stuff? 100% no. But you have to kind of reverse engineer it, which I'm never as big a fan of as I am of them just laying out, hey, this is how we create our new stuff. And they did that for threats in Finster's Monster Magic, and I was hoping they would do that for equipment here, and they didn't. Does that mean it's a bad book? No, it's a fantastic book. I just wish that had been a part of it. But I also don't know if they even could do that. Because again, a lot of the stuff that they make here is complex enough that they might not have a set list of rules. It's just something that somebody comes up with an idea and they turn it into something. So anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. In the comments down below. First of all, what are you most excited about in this book? Is it the new player option stuff, origins, influences, focuses? Are you interested in the laser lash like I am? Or are you creating commercials in your brain like I was for all the new vehicles? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.